the mic okay? Too big, huh? Too big. So we have some time up until the end of this session to entertain ourselves with questions. And the idea really is to gain some clarity. So whatever it is that isn't clear in our minds about the Dharma in any way, it's important for us to get clear on it to the degree that we can. So not all things are capable of being clarified by talking about them. Sometimes talking about them goes the other way. Yeah. But that's what this session is about, to clarify and address any issues that you have. So that means the ball is in your court.
If anyone who has a question, Jennifer will bring the mic so that those streaming can hear your question before Lama Michael responds.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning, Michael.
You know, this sound system is like really disturbing.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
you hear the voice, you can't tell where it's coming from. You look around, nobody's talking, but there's a voice talking.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to you.
Okay.
And
see
this
you.
is my sister who's visiting me. And I was talking to her yesterday about the 3-year retreat and, you know, the idea that people do not sleep lying down, that they sit upright when they're asleep. And I tried to give her, to the best of my understanding, reasons for why one might do that. And so a couple of questions came up. One was, do other Buddhist traditions do this that you know of? And secondly, why do we want to cultivate that lucid awareness while we're asleep? Can you explain more about why that's of value?
Well, first of all, I don't know of a Buddhist tradition that isn't weird. And I'm pretty familiar with them. I'd like to say that we're the weirdest just because we'd like to be the best at everything. But I actually do think that there are challenges. Let's put the weird moniker aside for a moment. There are challenges in whatever the tradition is. And if there aren't challenges, probably they're not very successful then at accomplishing what we set out to do in general in Buddhist traditions. Because we're trying to work with the causes of our personal and collective pain and suffering. So I don't know how you accomplish freeing yourself from that without going into it. It just is, it seems to be that there isn't any other alternative. So when we look at the teachings in this tradition, but really I think I could say, and even make a case for it, that no matter what the tradition is, it's all about dealing with that suffering. Because the suffering is not specific to particular traditions, it's specific to human beings. And beyond that, even animals. So the practices in all of the traditions, if you look at them close, you can see that they all share this same intention to provide the means to free oneself from suffering. So then, of course, one needs to ask the question at some point, what is suffering? Exactly. And so that's a whole other thing. That's where we sometimes start with the Four Noble Truths and just follow it right down, because that's the very beginning, really. We don't usually start there. Like, I wouldn't walk in here in the morning and start with the Four Noble Truths generally, because it's too big of a subject. So we want to come in and have a sense that we got something by the end of a couple of hours. And that's hard to do. But the Four Noble Truths, you can get many texts and look at them, and the explanation of suffering and its causes are really, really clear. So it's easy to even get that personally. But we could do that here too, have a class on the Four Noble Truths at some point. Might be good to do. So let's see, what did we get and what did we miss? What just happened? We have more?
That was helpful. And now can you speak specifically to the why we would cultivate a lucid, somewhat lucid state while dreaming,
Okay.
while sleeping?
Yeah, I'm not sure why you picked the dream. Any particular reason?
Why I picked the dream?
What?
Lucid dreaming?
Say?
Sleeping.
Oh, why people would be drawn to being sleep deprived? Something like that.
Well, it sounds like you were saying that it creates an obstacle that allows us to go into our suffering
What does?
in order to come out beyond it, perhaps.
What creates an obstacle?
Sleeping in an upright posture.
Oh, I see. No, I don't think that creates an obstacle.
No? So talk about it.
So in an ordinary way, we might say, yeah, that creates an obstacle to my sleep. But that in and of itself does not necessarily mean that we have an obstacle to clarity and understanding the nature of mind and so on. So mostly we would say, well, I can't quite imagine how in situations where I can't lie down and sleep, that's going to be helpful to see the nature of mind. So we need to just put that piece aside for a moment. It's kind of, in a certain way, what comes to mind is the last time that I saw Winter Olympics, and there were like these fantastic gymnasts, they're just like, they do amazing things with their bodies. And one could ask, how do you do it? Why do you do it? All sorts of those things. And you might get an answer which is kind of useful and interesting, but probably you're not going to do that. So in this case, we want to do these things. And when you think about the practices that are involved in the long retreat of 3+ years, it's just that many of the practices that are done, such as sitting up while you sleep, or not sleeping and sitting up and maybe not needing the same kind of sleep, or feeling like you need it, but discovering along the way that actually there's something helpful about it. So in the easiest, simplest way, we could say that going on a traditional 3-year retreat definitely does not have a goal of giving you more sleep. You could have gotten that for a lot less money and a lot less effort by numerous other ways. The goal here is simply the goal of the Buddhist practice itself, which is to abandon from our own mind stream the very things that cause us suffering. That we don't recognize the role that we play in it. And so when I have a problem, I look for who I can lay the blame on. I mean, that's just natural. We do that all the time without thinking about it. We don't think now, who am I going to blame? We just immediately say, it's you. You did it. Or this happened. Or something else happened. We don't have the tools to take full responsibility for our own experience. And that's what the practice and the path is actually more about. Like, how do you master those tools, get them, work with them continuously? Many people in this Sangha right here have the tools. You have the tools. I know you do. So having the tool is one thing. It's like you could go in Steve Parker's wood shop at home and you would have all the tools to make fantastic things. So why is it that you can't make them? The tools themselves are not sufficient. We have to work with them and learn how to work with them. And in this case, it means we want to, on a long retreat, we want to work with those tools 24/7. No break whatsoever. That's what we want to do. That's the way that we get to that place. Not everybody gets to that place, even on a long retreat. But almost all of them, I would say all of them who come in the beginning of the retreat and stay to the end, they will say that they had the experience of enormous benefit, even though they're not enlightened yet. We don't say that the 3-year retreat leads to enlightenment for the great majority of people. It does lead to an understanding of things that get you very close to and regular insights into the nature of mind. That doesn't mean that it's stable. I can jump into a lake and swim 100 yards across a small lake, no problem. The Pacific Ocean, not quite so good, you know. So yet, there are people who do long swims and do amazing things with their bodies. Here we want to do amazing things with our minds. And the tools of the practices of the Vajrayana, for example, and the Mahayana traditions, and the Theravada tradition too, are all contained within that retreat. And the teachings for it, if one does it correctly, their lives are guided by the schedule. They eat by the schedule. They sleep by the schedule. They practice by the schedule. They practice together by the schedule. They practice alone by the schedule. And so many things are learned from something like that. You learn to abandon your own agenda and take on the other agenda, which you understand is actually the agenda that you went into the retreat to master. But during that time, of course, we take all of the things that we had with us before the retreat, all of our likes and dislikes. And of course, there's always people on the retreat that we hoped wouldn't be on the retreat. And it's usually mutual, so that's going to be a problem. Those things all go with us. Then we have to work with those things, which of course we could say should have worked with them from the time we were 15 years old. But we managed to avoid them. So many of our mental habits we manage to avoid working with. And so when we get on retreat, you're forced to work with them because that's what you're working with now. And at a certain point, everybody has a sense of, what am I going to do? I wish I hadn't done this. I wish I wasn't on retreat. On any given day, you could wish you weren't on retreat. Any given week, any given month. But for most people, it comes full circle, and you have the sense of, no, actually, I set out to do this. I put all the things in place to do it. Now I'm doing it. And as the months go by and the years go by, it becomes psychologically more difficult to decide to leave. Like, I did this much. It's kind of like you're working for a PhD. Would you leave in the last month? No matter how much you hated it, you would probably stay. And it's a lot the same. That's kind of how we are as human beings. But there's no assumption, certainly no guarantee, that any given individual has attained any certain level of stable realization. The 3-year retreat, while it's rare for people to do that kind of thing, is nonetheless considered a beginning point. It's not a beginning and an end. It's still the beginning point when the retreat is over. It's like teachers often say, now you actually know how to continue at the end of the retreat. You have instructions for dozens of practice, the most complex and the most deep practices in the lineages, and you know how to do them. So if that's what you want to do, now you know how to do it. Those are not the problem. Even when you know how to do it, do you do it? Or does it just remain an aspiration gradually morphing into a grand disappointment? Sometimes that's it. Sometimes you come out of retreat and you want to do it, you can't do it, and years later, out of great disappointment, you finally rise out of that and actually do the practices. So no guarantee that that's the wrong method. Could be the right way for any given person. So I'm not sure how much more to say about it. Sleep deprivation is a terrible thing, and that is not really what the retreat is about. But I can say with certainty that I don't think anybody manages to escape sleep deprivation. Not that it's part of the retreat, not that one should become that, but I've had a lot of sleep deprivation that I never intended to have, and certainly wasn't caused by any of my practice, but by other things, physiological, mental things, all sorts of things play into that. When it comes to overcoming our own causes of suffering, the first thing we have to do is see it. So just like this morning's practice, we have some kind of suffering, mild or big. The first thing we have to do is see that. We have to see that suffering, not seeing what somebody else did to us to make us suffer, but seeing our own mental states. Mostly it boils down to grasping and aversion. I have a really such a nice meditation, and we immediately draw the conclusion that we have gone over the hump and we're now in the place where everything is going to be good. And almost before you finish saying that, it's not so good. So, in other words, it never ends. You just have to keep at it. And not all the practices on long retreat are for everybody. Some end up with 1 or 2 practices that were on the retreat, others don't. There's a wonderful little teaching on this that is really quite nice. We have a practice that we call the 4 immeasurables. I think probably almost everybody here is familiar with them, but I'll just mention them for those who may not know about them. The 4 immeasurables are divided into what you might call 4 wishes. There's the practice of loving kindness and compassion, which are, the loving kindness is about wishing that all sentient beings are free of the causes of suffering, and they experience that freedom. And the compassion piece is about wishing that all sentient beings are free of suffering and its causes. The previous one, I didn't say it quite right. For the immeasurable loving kindness is about the wish of having the experience of loving kindness its causes and its results. The things that bring positive experiences to us, that when we wish that for others, we call that loving kindness. It's not immeasurable loving kindness. So the underpinning of that loving kindness needs to be that we experience that loving kindness for all sentient beings without a single exception. Not most. Oftentimes we joke, all but one. There's one person I can't do it for. It's a little bit of a joke, but embedded in that joke is also some truth. Like we find ourselves picking and choosing who we make the wish for freedom from suffering for. That is to say, it's kind of like we have a sense of there are certain people who deserve their suffering. Deeply, we need to abandon that and hold on to a slightly different thing, which is there is no such thing as someone who is not worthy of full enlightenment, worthy of freedom from suffering, worthy of unbounded joy. It's like everyone is worthy of that. You can't actually engage deeply in the practice without that aspiration. And that's a hard one. That's maybe one of the most difficult ones on retreat because it's inevitable. People go on retreat, they're nice people, they're gentle people, they're determined to engage in the practices, and then things go wrong. They get sick. Maybe they think the cook did something to the food. Maybe the cook did do something to the food. It's like, And so little by little, the unbounded, the immeasurable loving kindness, compassion, and joy come about. I want to add one more thing to it, which is actually not part of the teaching on the four immeasurables. But there is a kind of hidden, disappointing truth. I suppose we could say most things that are true are disappointing. In this case, it's about how we all sit down to practice in order to free our minds from distress, in order to accomplish maybe a more joyful countenance, but if we look close at all of the practices, we can see that there's an underpinning of all of it, which includes a sense of, I need to feel better from doing these practices. In other words, I want to accomplish the benefit of others, but my priority really is accomplishing my own benefit. And one could say that totally makes sense. Who would continue to engage in difficult practices if there was no personal benefit? But the other side of that is, because attachment and aversion, attachment to a sense of self and aversion to the challenges to that sense of self are so potent that we find it difficult to practice exclusively for others. But somewhere along the way, the discovery has to be made that you cannot accomplish your own benefit. Period. It cannot be had. And it's an enormous disappointment. You rely upon all sentient beings for your happiness and for your realization. And so we need to come to this place of honoring all sentient beings without exception and engaging in practice for their benefit. And gradually that becomes clear. First, we recognize it by virtue of the joy that we get when we actually do something profoundly good for someone else. There's a joy that comes from that. We all have had that experience. Not just once, probably many, many times. We write it off as an anomaly too easily, when in fact, that is the entire path. if you look at all of the high practices, the difficult practices, the profound and the easy and the difficult, you will see that in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, which means also in the Vajrayana tradition of Buddhism, it's all about turning one's mind completely away from one's own benefit to the benefit of others. Without that, we can only chip away at our own sense of discomfort, sadness, occasional joy, which we then attach to, and it doesn't stay with us, it disappears, which then turns into something that feels difficult and dark. And you look at the people who we have known, the thing that comes to mind most clearly is the visit from Khenpo Rinpoche. He is the embodiment of joy and the embodiment of caring about others. So there's an easy lesson there. The benefit of being close to great beings is that we get to see this exact thing in action. Like, there it is. Just unbounded joy continuously. Not because he's an idiot, which some people would say, well, of course, he doesn't have to make a living. He doesn't have to do this. I've heard many people say this. He doesn't have to do all these things that the rest of us have to do, which are so painful. But denying the connection between holding the benefit of others beyond one's own self and the joy that comes from it doesn't get you anything. It's far better to take it on as a practice, try it and see. What do you get for it? By focusing as exclusively as you possibly can on the benefit of others. Using every tool at your disposal to help other beings. What do you get for it? We have to practice it. Just to put it aside as nothing is not the answer. So this all started with sleep deprivation, didn't it? I mean, you don't have to do a 3-year retreat to feel sleep deprived. Let me just attest to that. And it's common to feel a bit sleep deprived on retreat. And some of the practices that are the most profound require a change in physiological patterns in order to have certain experiences. And without engaging in certain practices that lead to some challenges there, it becomes difficult to actually embrace certain things. So I think a long retreat is weird. By any cultural norm, it's totally weird. But we've all been weird because we've all been teenagers. So we've all been weird and proud of it. So I think that it's not so odd to look at these things and wonder like how strange this thing is. Yeah. Oh, Diane.
Lama Michael, about lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
When we're aware that we're dreaming, that it's
Yeah.
not real. Would you say that the usefulness of that to us is that we can use this dreamlike illusory quality of dream to break down that hard shell that we put on our everyday reality? Is that what it's good for?
It's not good for any specific thing. You have to, I think, measure it from a Buddhist perspective. You need to measure the benefit of the lucid dream in terms of the meditation practices. So that varies remarkably from one tradition to another. So in the Vajrayana, for example, the tradition of of lucid dreaming is different than in some other traditions. It's even different within different Vajrayana schools. But generally speaking, within the Vajrayana, the whole point of lucid dreaming begins with practicing to see, just what we were doing this morning, to see your experience. To see your experience. We almost never see our experience. We experience it, but seeing the experience is a different matter. To actually see it while it's unfolding with no ulterior motive or intention, but to just see it, we almost never do that. We feel like our experience is something that happens to us. If I'm sick, that experience is happening to me. We don't, generally speaking, stop to just look at the experience of feeling sick and see what's there. That's not easy to do because we're in avoidance mode. I don't want to look at what I feel when I feel bad, because when I look at it, the first experience might very well be that I feel even worse. Lucid dreaming in the Vajrayana practices is about stepping out of our normal mode of limitation, whereas the dream potentially has no limitation. No limitation at all. You can do all sorts of things in a dream, and you do all sorts of things in dreams without intending to, but nonetheless they're sort of magical in some way, or they're horrific in some way. And those things in a dream, when we see those things, we easily have the experience that what we're looking at is illusory. Whereas out here, it's just the same illusory nature, but we experience it as solid. I ate bad food, I feel sick, I'm throwing up, it's like all these terrible things are going on. How many people stop and say, this is illusory? Or if they do, how many people stop and experience it as illusory? That isn't what we do. The dream practice is meant to give us an opportunity to experience all things as illusory. And in the context of that, we have the ability to do things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do.
Thank you.
So I have a question about meditation objects. I've only been doing this for...
You what?
I've only been doing formal meditation for about 2 years.
Oh.
But during that time, I think I knew it before, but now I know it even more. My mind wanders a lot. I don't know if there's like an average for how much people's minds wander.
Do not settle for the average.
Good, because I don't know. It might be above average. Who knows? I have a lot of trouble. I think the more I meditate, the more I can see how much my mind wanders.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is helpful,
Yeah.
but then in other ways, potentially is not.
So do you see your mind wander?
I notice more frequently when it's not on the object.
When it's what?
When my mind is not on the object. Like when
Yes.
I get...
And you notice the mind is not on the object.
I notice that I've attached to something. I notice that I'm distracted.
Were you distracted before your mind was on the object or afterwards?
I don't know. I don't know.
This is about building awareness about something, and it's, it's like I could explore this little thing here for an hour and see many things in it that I didn't see before, but it would kind of be in the so what bucket. Who cares? But it's helpful, at least for a long time, to care deeply about our experience within the context of our meditation, so that we develop the ability to see our experience unfolding. So that's really just like the shamatha, the calm abiding practice, except generally in the calm abiding practice. So generally in the calm abiding practice, a distraction is considered a defect. We're distracted, we've been taken away from our meditation. So every once in a while, we just need to have a look at something different. So depending upon where you are with the practice, a distraction can be a defect. It can derail you. Maybe you remember something difficult that happened yesterday or a year ago or a decade ago while you're doing your calm abiding practice, and suddenly that thing that you remember, you're just totally consumed by it. And we would say that's the nature of a distraction. You completely forget completely what it is you're doing. But it's interesting and important to understand that if in the midst of that distraction you could bring your awareness to that experience and just let it be there, that's a far more profound thing, even though the mind is like a whirlwind swirling around with all these things. The distraction itself becomes the object of the meditation. So in the beginning, that's too much. Too much. Just that we would be able to see, oops, I'm distracted, is plenty good enough. But little by little, we need to kind of work on that to make it more. And I think that the first big reason for it is it's interesting. We really need to nurture a sense of curiosity about our own minds. Like, if I identify with being a good meditator and then I find out that actually I'm not that good, what good is it to nurture a sense of disappointment around that? But often that's what happens. So then pretty soon after that, you don't want to meditate anymore, because who wants to meditate and it leads to disappointment? You know, I mean, smart people wouldn't stay in that rut, so they leave. But we need to understand that meditation is all about one thing, and that is exploring the nature of mind itself. That's where everything happens. It doesn't happen somewhere else. Our distractions happen there. Our clarity happens there. Our anger happens there. Our loving kindness happens there. Our mistakes happen there. Our successes happen. Everything happens there. So a deep curiosity about it, and taking the tools of the meditation, whether it's whatever tradition it is, and working with those tools with a sense of, what could I be more curious about than my own mind? Curious about other people's minds is not so helpful. They have their own issues. So you can use that also. That is to say, I'm having a real aversion today to what I ate yesterday. Then we can leverage that. Remember, your realization relies 100% on other beings. This is not just an idea. It's like when you look at it really close, you realize you cannot do it. And those of us who have been practicing for many decades know you cannot do it. It's not going to happen. Half your life went into it and you're still not there. It needs to be focused on the benefit of others, because they are the same as you are. You will discover the nature of your own mind by offering all of your effort for others to discover the nature of their minds. There is no other way. So the interesting thing is that The four immeasurables are often taught early on, not after you've been doing long retreats and all these things. They're taught early on, sometimes in the very beginning. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. Ooh, equanimity is a real big one. Immeasurable equanimity. What does that mean? That you treat all beings with loving kindness without a single exception. So that gets kind of boring after a while. Then we want to try something else. This is where the fruit happens. I want to try something else. And then maybe you have a really distasteful encounter with somebody. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's someone you just met. And you just become completely confused and attached and a strong sense of aversion, all these things coming on, that what we would call suffering. And in that moment, in enough time, you will see, there was my opportunity. There was my opportunity. I alone cannot generate that much aversion. I actually need help to feel that bad. I can't do that on my own. So that's where you put your awareness on the benefit of others. And the beginning point is, they have the same issue I have. They think other people cause them these problems. And as a result, more problems come. If you think of your spouse as the cause of your suffering, you'll end up in a divorce. I mean, just magnify that by as many ways as you can think about it. It doesn't work. So there has to be a way in order to grasp the problems that we encounter, our own suffering, and see them accurately in a way that we would never otherwise see them that way, so that we feel grateful for the thing that 5 minutes ago was a problem, and now I see the jewel. This is when we meet people like Khenpo Rinpoche, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at someone who does this, who has been doing this for so long, has studied with the most profound teachers. They don't try. It just happens like that. How are we doing? Are we late yet?
10 minutes.
I don't know your name.
Kate.
Kate. Did we meet before? I don't know either. That's why I asked. Anyway, did your question get addressed?
Yes, thank you.
You're looking like maybe, maybe not, which I could take as an honest response.
Lama Michael, it's over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. This morning's practice, your suggestion of working with not our breath.
With what?
Not working with our breath, but using
Oh, yeah.
what comes up. And
Yeah. So you're referencing the practice of calm abiding, which the particular version that we normally use here, and there's literally hundreds of ways to engage in that practice. You're using the one where we follow our breath. We just like put our awareness on it. The breath comes, the breath goes, the breath comes, the breath goes. That's a good practice. So,
Well, this morning, though, you touched on something that has been niggling in the back of my mind for a while, because my root Lama Khenpo Kunga will, when he's teaching the insight and then leading to nature of mind, it's that there's always a knowing, like we don't think about it, but we know we're sitting, or we know we're walking, or we know, just like I know that it's daylight and not evening. But so when working with my thoughts, it seems to be a real fine line between thinking a thought and just being aware of a thought. And it might have been last week at the Mahamudra teaching that Bill gave. He was saying one way to see whether we're thinking our thoughts is if it makes sense. And I've been practicing lately, like 45-minute bus rides, just sitting there and seeing people come, go, feeling the jounce or the jiggle, the jerks, and then just being aware or making up story. But there's an obvious, when I'm thinking a thought or making up a story about who just got on versus just being aware of a young kid just got on with his mom. So I'm wondering where is that like line between thinking a thought and just being aware of it?
Well, it's about awareness. It's about awareness. We often have mental experiences, so we might call it thinking about, but in a broader sense we could say that we're more or less continuously in the stream of our mental experiences. And we would say, as Buddhists, we would say, that stream did not begin with this life, and it does not end with this life. It has no beginning and no end. Now, conceptually, that might be difficult to completely embrace. However, experientially, when you look at it, you can see there is no end. You cannot find the beginning. Whatever might have been the beginning was the cause of something that came from that beginning, and it just keeps rolling like that. And so I think it's best to simplify this. I want to simplify it because the simplicity is both at the beginning of the path, when we first sit down to meditate the first time. We must have something that is simple. And as time goes on, as Americans, we are drawn to complexity. But I remember once, 30 years ago, Kala Rinpoche saying, there is no teaching of the Dharma, no matter how simple or how complex. There is no teaching of the Dharma that does not contain the entire Dharma. And at the time, 30 years ago, that felt like a ho-hum, go back to sleep, which mostly I did at that time when receiving teachings. I would daydream because I didn't know what to do with what I'm dealing with. Like, look at your mind, it's like really difficult. You look at your mind and it's kind of like putting a marble on top of another marble. It just like falls off immediately. There's no space there to rest with something. What's critical, once we get past the idea that we should be practicing this or this profound thing or that profound thing, or we should be getting better at this or that thing we should be getting better at, my own opinion about this, for whatever it's worth, is that we do much better with difficult things like learning to meditate and to meditate deeply. We do much better when we are inspired by and curious about what we're doing. If the curiosity vanishes because the instructions were not clear enough, or we didn't get enough support, or there was something that wasn't really there, then I think it actually, from a teacher's perspective, I just want to put this in because I actually don't believe that everybody believes this, but I think that anyone who's teaching the Dharma is responsible for the interest of the people who listen to it. That is to say, it's not good enough to give an authentic teaching on the Dharma and then it doesn't work for somebody and to write it off as that's their problem. It's not good enough. Not to say that one can always do what's good enough, but I think it's important to recognize, I try to recognize that, like when you say something, it needs to be understood. And the understanding, if it is not there, that's the person who said those things, who's responsible to get the understanding there. You can't just deliver it to the front door. You have to open the door and take it in, and get it. And if that doesn't happen, you have to keep at it until it happens. So I think that it's critical that if you practice the Dharma and you're going to stick with it, it's terrible not to stick with it. It's terrible not to stick with it. Then we feel like we have failed. And when we feel like we have failed, we have put aside what many of us think is the most profound opportunity in this life. So that's why I think that teachers should take full responsibility for making sure, and as students, the responsibility of saying, I don't get it quite. Or this somehow, I don't know what working for me would look like, but it isn't doing that, I think. Until you can kind of get in the saddle and feel like this is what I really want to do. This is working for me. And little by little then, it can like build. But when we just follow the rule, you should practice this long every day and do this no matter what the outcome is, at some point people give up. And I used to have that problem too, and think about how, well, the teaching was authentic. I don't know why people are not getting it. I think that we need a front end on it. Like, you get the teaching, it's authentic. Now you need to get what is necessary collectively and individually so that people feel like, I can do this. And once you have that, you can then talk about it with other people who are having the same things, help each other forward with it. That's what we call Sangha. It's not just a passive group. It's a group that helps each other to understand. And you have a group of people who all practice and meditate. If there's enough people there, there are people who you are happy to connect with and talk about it and work with it. And that's really the meaning of the community. Should be able to do that. If we can't do that, we need to put it on the table and work with it. Now we've managed to be late, which is our general goal.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
thank you so much for today.